Assalamu alaikum and peace be with all of you. It is my absolute honor to welcome you to the Muslim Community Center Interfaith and Outreach webinar. We are thrilled to bring together a group of volunteers across interfaith organizations who spent some time earlier this year bearing witness at the Mexican-US border. My name is Aisha Goriozaki and I will be your moderator for this webinar and this conversation. In my day job, I serve as a manager on the Inclusive Diversity team at Allstate and also serve as the board member for Muslim Women's Alliance of Chicago and the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition. As we get started, I'd like to start by first reflecting on the lands on which we reside. I know that we're all joining from all over, and we want to make sure that we acknowledge the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of the indigenous peoples who have been here from the start, who are still here and often still fighting for their legacy. I would like to acknowledge the original caretakers of our lands, and I invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the lands of where you are located. I would also like to note that we are dealing with a global pandemic, and I hope that all of you are taking good care of yourselves, your families, and the communities with which you live and serve. I'd especially like to thank the essential workers that are placing their lives often in harm's way to ensure that we're all being served in the best way. And finally, I know many of our hearts are heavy as we continually hear about racialized incidents around the country. I send prayers of peace and understanding to the Black and African American communities, and I request that we all speak up and take action against the atrocities to drive change and to demand justice. A few housekeeping items as we get started. This session will be recorded and will be available after we've completed our time together this evening. We welcome you to review any previous webinars that are available on the Muslim Community Center YouTube channel, as well as the Muslim Community Center Interfaith and Outreach Facebook page. As some of you may know, the Muslim Community Center, a community center where I grew up and have been involved in as a child all the way through my own family for over 40 years, has been around in the community for over 50 years, and is a space where many families continue to be engaged. The Interfaith and Outreach Committee, which is our host for tonight, is committed to building stronger communities through collaborations, much like the conversation you'll hear today as we partnered with Hakafa and the Winnetka Congregational Church. Our committee has been able to bring people together to build hope after experiences like the anti-Muslim ban, the Christchurch shooting, and we have resources on livable wages. We've addressed anti-Blackness in the Muslim community and many other timely topics. As you can imagine, many houses of worship are struggling these days with our doors closed. We welcome you to consider donations. If you can't now, we hope you will at a future time. And if you're enjoying the programming, we know that any amount will be helpful. Civic engagement is really important to the Muslim Community Center and to all of my co-panelists this evening. And we'll ask that you consider census participation and ultimately take the time to be sure you're voting. Tonight's agenda, so let's get talking a little bit about why we're all here together. A couple of months ago in early February, a group of 23 volunteers got together from Hakafa, from the Muslim Community Center, and from the Winnetka Congregational Church to go and witness and observe what was happening at the United States-Mexican border. This evening, we're fortunate to come together. Thank you for joining us virtually. This evening, we're excited to come together and tell you about what those experiences were like for us and to help us all engage in really meaningful discussion. I'd like all of you to know who have joined us this evening that you can use the question feature to type in questions as they sort of come to you. Each of our panelists will introduce themselves, and then we'll have a chance to have some moderated conversation. We also have a guest from a local organization who will be able to tell us about some resources and ways that we can take action locally. And then finally, we'll turn to those questions from you all so that our panelists can engage with you and provide you with some of the experiences that they had when we were over there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. I'll say the name of each of our panelists to just sort of point to them. They'll turn their camera on and make sure that their sound is working, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to sort of start by inviting Hiba.
Assalamu alaikum and peace be upon you to everyone that is listening. My name is Hiba. I was on the trip as an affiliate with MCC. So I grew up going to MCC. I don't live in Chicago at the moment, but one of the organizers of the trip was my dad, and he told me about a trip that he had gone on early in the year, kind of a scouting trip to kind of get a lay of the land down in Brownsville and Matamoros. And so for me, the reason I really wanted to go, though, was really fueled by my faith, my religion, Islam. And for me, it was rooted in that because from a very, very young age, I was told that part of being Muslim means speaking out against injustice and serving those in need. And I felt like this was a really big opportunity to be able to do that. And I also felt that helping those in need was not just about donating and giving to nonprofits. And while those are really, really important and definitely part of something that we should be doing, I felt that being on the ground and seeing face to face people that were suffering was really important to me, and to be able to help and serve those people. So yeah, that's why I went.
Thank you, Heba. I think that's very important for folks to have an understanding. I'd like to now invite Mike.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm sorry?
I just want to make sure your camera's on.
Oh, the camera's on. We need the camera on. Okay. Camera's on. There we go. Thank you for the reminder. No, it was just a fantastic opportunity to be involved in with different houses of worship in different faith communities. One of the most attractive things to me about joining this trip and helping to organize it from the Winnetka Congregational Church side of things was the burgeoning relationship that Winnetka Congregational Church has with MCC and Congregation Hakafa. It was always very intriguing to me because I love the idea of being exposed to different faith practices and perspectives. I think that kind of exposure can only serve to expand my own faith. So I love the idea of being involved in that. And then I wanted to go to the border particularly because I became very interested in it when child detentions became a visible issue. I could not understand that approach to the border challenge. And I wanted to have firsthand experience about what's going on at the border. And so I was very grateful to be able to stand there and stand elbow to elbow with people of different faiths while doing so.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. I'd like to turn it over to Zishan now.
Hi, I'm Zishan Bakrani. I went to the trip with the MCC congregation, and I've been in Chicago my whole life. And been part of MCC, and when I realized like, hey, my parents were married at MCC, it was kind of like this big history. And when I heard about, and the reason I wanted to go on the trip was when I heard about it, some of these issues, we're so far from it sometimes, but really close to it at the same time that we're not able to get all the information behind it. My parents are immigrants. And my family has been through situations that are similar to what these people are going through, but luckily we were able to come to this country and then become part of it and, give back from what we have. And I think everybody should have that opportunity. We shouldn't be just limited because of what our social status is or where we came from or who we are. Everybody should have an opportunity to experience something similar to what I have, right? And I feel like I'm a great citizen for this country, and there's other people that are just like me that have kids that are willing to work hard. And I kind of wanted to go and see and understand what it's really like down there and share those stories, because sometimes we can't understand what's happening because we read it in the news, or it's really hard to kind of just wash it away with everything else going on in life. But being able to go witness it and bring the stories back and really be able to articulate what is happening and what you're seeing can give that perspective to somebody else that makes them willing to fight for what is right and and then allow them to see what is wrong that's happening. So it was a very like profound experience to kind of witness it with other religious groups too, to see what their thoughts are and how they would react to these situations, especially people that have been in this country for a very long time, what their thoughts are in this current time. So that it was a very eye-opening experience, and it's still like you still go back and think about it. And I think in this call, we're 3 months out with a lot of changes that have happened in the world. I think we can all, I'm very excited to hear what everybody else's thoughts are, and then discussing what we can do and learning about what we can do going forward.
Thank you, Sishan. I'd now like to turn it over to Howard and Penny Fields.
Hi, I'm Howard Fields, and I think I'm back on.
Is the camera on?
Yeah, you're on.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think the reason I went, well, first of all, it happened to be during a time that I realized I was able to get away from work, so that was beneficial. But at one of our congregational, I'm a member of Congregational Hakafa. At one of the meetings, there was a discussion from some of the people that had gone on one of the scouting trips. So it was an earlier trip that people went on, came back and explained some of what they had done, and it was, it just sounded like something that I would really like to be part of. I will let Penny talk about more of why she wanted to go, because part of my wanting to go was to be able to join my wife on the trip, and so that was an important part of the decision as well. So with that, I'll hand off to you, Penny.
I'm Penny, also a member of Congregation Hakafa, and I also felt very much like Mike did. As I have felt it all along, what is going on is horrendous, and when the children became involved, it felt like it crossed a line for me, and something had to be done. And I think it's very easy to sit back and speak about what's happening, and I felt like if I saw it firsthand, I would tell that story very differently, and I feel that was very true. And I felt it's also very easy to say somebody needs to do something about it, and I feel like we're in a position, and everybody is, to make a difference. Being a parent and a grandparent, to sit by and see what's happening to families just doesn't seem okay with me. And so it felt very important to me. The interfaith piece of it was also really, really appealing. And I think that especially everything, and it's not just this week, unfortunately, we're getting footage, but it's been going on. And I think that there's an example of people coming together from very different backgrounds and learning. I mean, I obviously learned so much about the border, but I was really excited to, and it did happen, learn about other people's faith and how they came to it. And so that was a really important component, and our similarities more than our differences. And I think that if more organizations had more interfaith groups and included people, I don't know, maybe we would see a little bit of a change. So.
Very possible. Thank you, Howard and Penny. We're going to turn it over to Safe.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Saif Muzzer, and I was born and raised in Chicago my whole life. Been a part of MCC for about 30 years, volunteering about 15. I'm the chairperson for the Dawah Committee, but I also handle the funeral arrangements here in Chicago. So one of the reasons why I went on the trip, Asif is my cousin, and he told me about it, and I was always a person of justice and doing the right thing and helping people out. Hence, I joined the Muslim Community Center, and so serving was something I always wanted to do. So when I found the opportunity to serve the people on the border, it made me happy. So when I got there, I learned a lot of different things, learned about a lot of different faiths, and it wasn't just the aspect of what you call helping and working with the immigrants, but also with the different faiths. And we talked a lot about different beliefs, and it was so comfortable, and at the same time, some of us were in the same houses, and we talked all night about different subjects, and we have more in common than than we don't. So it was another aspect of a border, you can say. You know what I'm saying? It was borders and borders. So those borders, I felt that they were lifted, and I guess those also the borders of not being able to be in a conflict zone and seeing something with your own eyes. So there was a lot of things I experienced, and I mean, I have a lot of stories, a lot of pictures, a lot of memories. I was able to gain a lot of, you know, good friendships from a lot of the people that I met. It was just an amazing time, and you know, these are things that I want to reflect on and try to, you know, see if we can go back out there and help them out, and just continue the work for other communities that are suffering, you know, in the local community. Obviously, we know Chicago is a very horrible place when it comes to, you know, the murder rate and everything like this. So, you know, this was the gist of my trip over there. Thank you.
Thank you, Saif. All right, and with that, we are going to ask Peggy if you can round out our panelist introductions.
Does that work? Okay.
Yeah, you look great. Yep.
Thanks. So I wanted to go on the trip for a couple of reasons. One was I was completely horrified by the racist policies of our current government and the incredible cruelty to the migrant communities and the individuals who were trying to come into this country for no reason other than they wanted to have a better life for themselves and their families, which is what all of our forebears wanted, and they were able to come here. To me, the policy of family separation and particularly caging children was unbearable. The opportunity of this trip came along, and finally I felt like, okay, I can see it. It's our obligation as citizens to see what's going on there, not just to read about it and turn the page. Judaism has a concept called tikkun olam, which means that you're obligated to try to repair the world. And to me, this was a wonderful way to start to do that through serving the people who needed it the most. We have a lot to give, and I just felt like it was our obligation and our privilege and our honor to be able to do it. Being in a group, an interfaith group, was wonderful, and I learned about people from different faiths and also different ages and different life experiences, and that was just such an amazing part of this trip for me. So it hasn't left me. I think about it all the time, and actually during this quarantine period I've started learning Spanish, so maybe I'll be a little better prepared next time.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Peggy. And thank you all for spending a few moments letting us connect with you on a deeper level and sharing the reason that you wanted to participate in this trip. I do want to call out that you heard a few names mentioned. There were about 23 of us. A few of others who joined us are also on the call with us, and they may on occasion jump in and share some insight. So we were very fortunate to have a pretty healthy group. You heard the interfaith connection. You heard connections across culture, across age, across faith, across, you know, maybe life stage. And I think these were components that added to the richness of what we had all initially signed up to go. So really, most folks did not know each other when they arrived. And part of our travel together was when we got to connect and really know each other much better by spending all day, every day together. So we were together for about 3 full days, and that included in staying together in sort of even in the evenings, right? So we were in homes together after we were done doing some of our work. So just to help you understand what that experience was like, I'm going to kind of ask our panelists, we're going to sort of chunk it up into what the days were like. So each day, different groups of us, and because there was a healthy group, we were able to divide up and essentially get to sort of engage and see certain experiences while we were there. So some of us visited courts, some of us visited the airport to see folks as they were being deported. Others of us were involved in preparing food. Many of us helped serve food. We also had an opportunity to walk the camps and get some information and insight from folks who were supporting individuals who were living in the camps and or themselves were living in the camp. So you see that there was a lot of different ways that we could observe what was happening at the border. So what I'd like to do is start by asking a few of our guests here tonight, sharing what it was like when they observed the court. So I'm going to try to start with Mike, Howard, and Saif, if you're comfortable sharing a little bit about what the experience was like on the day or the days when you were able to visit the court. And maybe you could set up for people a little bit of what that was like. So even getting there, these were makeshift buildings. These were buildings that weren't there before. So if you give a little context, that might really help our guests tonight have a sense of what was happening. So I'll start with Howard. Is that you ready to maybe
Sure.
jump? Great.
I can jump in. First of all, in response to your comment, it's very generous of you to call it makeshift buildings. They were really tents.
Yeah.
Permanent tents, but tents.
Fair.
And they have a waiting area with benches for the observers to wait in. We had been warned that they turned the air conditioning on as much as they could possibly to try to freeze you out to get you to leave. It wasn't that cold, but it was chilly. We waited there, and finally we were allowed to go into the so-called courtroom. And I put air quotes around that because I am a non-practicing attorney, and I know what a courtroom is supposed to be, and this was not a courtroom. I'm going to make a couple of comments and put a plug in for a Facebook page called Witness at the Border, because it was only after I got back and in reading one of the entries that I discovered just exactly how different some of the two different courtrooms there were. So there were two courtrooms under these tents, and in each room there were probably 25 immigrants that were there for their first hearing before the immigration court. And really the hearing is just to let them know what they need to do in order to have any chance of gaining asylum in the U.S. The courtroom that I was in, the judge, who is not sitting in the courtroom, the judge is sitting 20 miles away in a real courtroom, and is just there by video. The judge read a script, and a couple of times asked the immigrants to respond together. If you understand, say yes. There was a translator who was translating from, presumably from English to Spanish. I can't, since I know very, very, very little Spanish, I can't tell you how accurate the translation was, but I would guess that it was fairly accurate because the translator was also reading from a script. I was amazed after getting home to find out that the other courtroom, the judge actually called each of the immigrants up individually to ask them a few questions, which quite frankly may have made the whole thing even more of a mockery, because what was really hit me hard was in exiting the courtroom, there was a banner that was up, and Aisha, I don't know if it's something that you've got within your slides, but there was a banner which was basically a sham trial is not a trial at all. This was something that the United States government is going through the motions in order to deny asylum. And every step along the way, the government has put up hurdles to people. So it was depressing to be there. I'm glad I saw it, but it was depressing. It didn't provide a level of hope. finding out later that it was different between the two courtrooms just amazed me. So I think those are my initial feelings are about the courts, and with that, I'll yield to whoever you want to call on next, Aisha.
Thank you, Howard. I was going to see if either Mike or Saif, if there's anything you wanted to add to, I think, what was a really descriptive, sort of perspective from Howard.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
What I understood before we got there was that no witnessing was allowed inside the tents. That had been the case apparently for many weeks leading up to our visit. That people couldn't even go inside unless they had a court appearance. So that was a welcome change in terms of policy to allow witnessing in. And so when we got there, we were allowed to go. So I was very grateful for that. When I entered the court complex, it was very naturally intimidating, just because it's uniformed, armed. Not all of them are armed, by the way. Many of them are uniformed and unarmed. But guards, or just the entire staff, was uniformed, badged people. And so there was this kind of just general intimidating factor to it, because this makeshift tent complex, which was it was tents and it was containers. It's like shipping container things like that were put together to make rooms as well. And but I, through the entire week, I spent my time looking for goodness where I could find it, because I knew I was going to see things that were going to trouble me. That was obvious. But I considered it an exercise of faith to try to see good wherever I was going. And so I can report that there was kindness and respect from all the uniformed people that were there. We were offered water. We were asked if we were comfortable. We were communicated with in terms of the schedule of when we would go in very well. And then when we got in to the courtroom and were witnessing, I was in the courtroom that Howard described as the judge reading from the script and the translator reading from the script, and everything happening kind of in unison. But then everyone, by the way, in that courtroom had their individual court appearances. But the preliminaries were all done en masse. I could sense a palpable tension among those sitting there. It's just obviously terribly trying moment that I'm sure because of language barriers, there's a confusion about what's taking place, a need to be very careful listening to what the parameters are, having to deal with that language barrier in that context, I would imagine would be tremendously difficult. Many of these people, the safety of their futures was at stake, their ability to survive is at stake, and you could feel that hanging in the air. One of the things that I was very impressed with coming out of that experience was the kindness and generosity of the bailiff. He, through any moment that was taking place, anything that people were directed to do, if someone was directed to come up, the bailiff was there to help guide, to help them up to where they need to go, to explain what needed to be done. When there was paperwork handed out, the bailiff would help them with paperwork, would move, take paperwork from where it needed to be, put it in the hand of the person, turn pages to help them see what needed to be done. I was very impressed by that, because that uniformed, essentially guard, could have taken an attitude of opposition from all these people, and he was really just seemed to be the caretaker of the room.
Right.
And so that was beautiful to witness. But there was no question that, well, not that there's, who knows? It's such a complicated thing. I know I have questions about all of it. The thing, but what I was struck with was the fact that this makeshift court even existed. Bothered me. And as I'm sitting there, because the judge is sitting in, like Howard said, sitting in a court 20 miles away under previous policy, that is the court where the proceedings would have taken place.
Right.
But with the MPP policy, the MPP policy was a policy of returning asylum seekers to Mexico. Just to explain to people who may not know, I certainly didn't know, was that the former policy was if you came and presented yourself at the border and applied for asylum, you were allowed to come into the country for your own protection. You had a speedy hearing about a preliminary hearing, which is what this hearing was. You would do that in the United States, and then you were, if your accommodations situation met certain parameters, then you were released to stay in the United States until you had your court date. The current policy is that you present yourself at the border for asylum, you are recorded so that you can get a date.
Right.
Your name is recorded and you go into the system to get a date, but you do not get to cross into the United States. You have to return back to Mexico and wait for your court date there, which is a new policy, and one I don't agree with. So then when the date comes up, then you present yourself at the border for your court date, and you're brought, literally this tent court city is literally on the border.
Yeah.
It's just inside the border. And so you come in and then you get your court date, and after that court hearing, you're returned again back across the border. So that was as I sat there, I said, my thoughts were this is not the way I want it to be.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. I think one thing, and Saif, I'll turn it over to you in a second if there's something you want to add, but I do think it would be helpful maybe for folks to also realize that as people are in the courtroom, their children are with them, right? So these are sometimes families, not just always individuals. Saif, is there anything you would like to add about the experience being in the court?
Actually, I didn't get a chance to go.
You didn't, okay. No problem, no problem. I know, just for context, folks, there were some days when people went to do something, and I know in my experience as well, the internet was off one day and the court just didn't happen. So as what Mike and Howard are sharing about judges being kind of beamed in via television, if internet wasn't working, even though they were very close geographically, even if the judges, they wouldn't come in. So if the internet went down, you might have sort of a different experience. So thank you. We're going to move on just to kind of, again, give you more sense of what were some of the ways that we supported. There were folks who were being served food nightly. And so this was serving to about 1,000 and plus folks who are, basically stranded in the camp. So what I'd like to do is see if we can get a couple of you, and say, feel free to jump in here since this might make sense, but I'd like to ask Penny, Zishan, Hiba, and Saif maybe to share a little bit about what the experience was like. The picture that you have in front of you actually is during food service. So talk a little bit about what it was like. People may not understand even there's prep involved in one place, but then to actually serve people, you're having to get materials. So give folks the context and sort of the experience. And I'll see if I can get a couple photos to show up behind us. So who'd like to start? I can either start with Hiba or Penny, Zishan, Saif, any one of you. One of you tell me who wants to start and we'll get going here.
I can start, that's fine.
Great.
I just wanted to
Penny.
add very quickly something about the courts that was very shocking to me. People were given a second date to come back. We were there in February. The dates were May, and they were living in tents with their families. I also felt very much that the video was very much a separation and very dehumanizing, that they didn't have to look these people in the eye, and it makes it easier to deny their request. So I just wanted to add that because that really struck me.
Thank you, Penny.
So the food prep to me was amazing. When we got there, it was organized by World Central Kitchen, and talk about wanting to donate to an organization, especially even now. I've never really volunteered with an organization doing something of that magnitude so organized. And our time was very limited for a big job, and I so appreciated that. And done in such a wonderful spirit, and never losing sight of respecting the people that we were serving. So even the food, it wasn't a bunch of junk food. A lot of it was food that was familiar to people in the camps. They tried to, you know, change it around so everybody was getting food that they were familiar with. And I so appreciated that. And they also stressed from the moment we got there, besides the cleanliness and all of that, you know, important stuff, of making eye contact with, you know, just humanizing these people, making eye contact, talking to them, telling them what they're eating. And I really appreciated going with that information. And so I, you know, other than that, I peeled potatoes, scrubbed floors, scrubbed bins, but it was all really done in such an organized and it was a wonderful experience. And everybody participated, so you never felt like everybody was sweeping floors, and as were their staff. Everybody was sweeping floors, everybody was washing dishes, everybody was peeling, and it was a real sense of camaraderie. And I mean, we were there for like 6 or 7 hours. And again, moving it is quite an ordeal because you have to walk across. I don't know if do you want me to speak to that? I think that's further down. But
yeah,
anyway,
but the food prep, it's a huge endeavor, huge. But I so appreciated that they never lost sight of who they were serving, and it wasn't at all about them or us, or it was really about who we were serving. And I so appreciated that, and it just made it feel much better. So yeah. Thank you.
I was so appreciative the food was healthy and not a bunch of junk that they were getting.
Yeah. There was a lot of intentionality that World Central Kitchen put into place to ensure that not just, I think, the cultural awareness and sort of cognizance, but also that this is food that we would want people to enjoy, that this is food that will supplement them in the best ways and really healthy, beautiful things. Saif or Hiba, do you want to share a little bit about what it was like in the food prep experience for you? I know you both had some time there.
Hiba, you want to go first, or I can go after you if you want to go first?
Sure. I can go first.
Thanks, Hiba.
My camera. I don't know if it's on, but
yeah, you're good. You're perfect.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I was involved with food prep the first day, and it was a really great experience. Just like Penny was talking about. It was really nice to be able to do that all together. You know, we put on some music. We were, you know, talking about, you know, our faiths, and also just like having a lot of conversation in general. And I think what stood out to me too is kind of the intentionality with World Central Kitchen. One of the things I love the most and that always sticks as a memory with me is they said when we were filling like the pans, they said that I think the first day was lasagna, and they said to make sure they didn't say not to make, but that even the corner pieces were you know, filled all the way, and like to make sure that everyone got like an equal piece. And I thought that was so beautiful because it really humanizes, and they really made an effort to humanize the people that they were serving. Another memory that I have and I'm very fond of is so we took the food across the border in these big carts, and you cross over this bridge, and then once you get to the camp, I know I'm kind of like rushing through that it's kind of a long walk and experience, but once you get closer to the camp, you kind of have to lift it up these stairs, and it gets a little more bumpy and rocky. And pretty much once we got to that point, all of these kids and members of the camp came rushing up to us and helped us carry the carts to the area that we were going to be serving the food at. And I thought that was really beautiful too. And they were just, everyone was, you know, despite their circumstances, so sweet, so welcoming, especially the kids. Like, they were just so playful and so excited to see us. And do you want me to talk about like what it was like in the camp as well, or should I leave it at that?
Let's finish. We'll just wrap up with Safe and Zishan. If there's anything else they want to add about the food prep, and then we'll jump to sort of thinking about what it was like when we, either folks who visited the camps and or did some of the serving. So Safe, you want to jump in about some, I know you were having, it was quite an experience in the kitchen with you.
Yeah, I talk a lot, so I was talking a lot. I got to talk to a lot of different faith groups, you know, Christian, Jewish, Muslims. I got to know a lot of the people in our own community, you know, which I didn't have that much of an experience with. And it was a lot of work, you know, and I could have done a lot more. You know, I felt really great. I was, you know, I had that drive to help out and just do more and more. I wish I could have done it for a lot longer. And we cut a lot of things. We worked together as a team. We joked, we laughed, you know, we had some music in the background. So, I mean, it was definitely an experience. And we got to connect with different organizations at the Methodist Church. That's where we did our prep. And even going to the border, I know some of the details were shared by Hibba and Peggy. So when we got there, it was such a humbling experience serving the people the food. I know we do this also in Ramadan and also with different organizations like Ohala Foundation here in Chicago. So there's a lot of work we do over here. But going down there, serving the people the food, right, it was just amazing because you're in the camps and you're serving the people the food. You can see all these kids, even the adults, the older people, you know, and the way they look at you, and when you try to communicate with them, even though my Spanish was a little bit broken, and they were happy and they were humble and they were, you know, they liked us, you know, and we liked them, you know. So it was just a beautiful experience, you know, and that's something I guess I'll take with me for the rest of my life. And hopefully, you know, that's just not the only time I get to do that, you know, and have that opportunity. And not just over there at the border, wherever there's problems, wherever there's hunger. I think, I mean, us as, you know, different religions should always come forward, you know, together as a team, you know, like the Fantastic Four.
Yes.
You know, and just go out and help people. We all have different skills and, you know, different things to give. And, you know, I can just go on and on about the experience. And definitely, you know, a lot of cool people I met, you know, and that's pretty much what I have. I mean, I think if Zishan has anything else to contribute, that'd be great.
Hey,
You want to add about food? Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So the first day I did food service, and the second day I did food prep. During the food service, it was kind of, to me, it was kind of that day, I think, was the first day I went to the border, and you see like all these people just in the line, like to get into America. So this is kind of like on the way back. So this was one thing with when we did food service, we were taking all the stuff back, but like we were taking all the, it's in the picture, we're taking all these carts back, and we're just walking past hundreds of people, and it's all because we all have US passports. And so like with all that food service, it's just like we're like walking through, and it's like I've never felt so like uncomfortably privileged. It was just such a weird feeling. These people want to get through, but I can just walk right past them, and I don't have to get in this line, which is probably half a mile long.
Right.
That was like one thought that I had. It just kind of stuck with me, that like these people are just trying to get in. That they're not even like the refugees. They're just the people trying to get in, and it's already that hard, and these other people are waiting in line. And then the other piece, when we were actually serving the food, you kind of get a chance to see everybody at the camp. And like one of the biggest things was that you see a lot of families, and then you see a lot of, you know, single people. You see kids, and sometimes the kids are helping their little brother or sister get food. Sometimes there's just the mom by herself with two kids in her, you know, one arm, one kid on the bottom. Like you're trying to give them food, and kind of just it's very sad. They're all happy and stuff, but it's very sad to see that like they have to struggle this much just to do something that we all want to do and just get and have a better life. Like this is something that they shouldn't have to do. And then the kids, is just they're just kids. They're reminded me of my niece and nephew. Like they're the same age as them. They're laughing and playing, but it's such a different situation. Like my niece and nephew get to go to a house and, you know, and sleep there, but they'll have to go back to a tent. Like they're the same age, the same like reactions, and it kind of just makes you realize that we're not any different, right? Like we all have the same like hopes and dreams, and like most of these people just want better lives for their kids, and their kids just want to have good lives. They really don't understand necessarily what situation they're in, but they're in it and they're happy, but it's just that it could be better for them, and they don't need to be going back to a tent. And it's that reminder that it constantly gave throughout the situation. And then the next day I did food prep. So what was nice about doing that food prep the next day was I kind of got to experience everything happening at the camp and going through standing at the border and then going through the camp and seeing people and then kind of debriefing with everybody as we're cooking, and we're like having fun, but at the same time we're talking about the situation and what's going on and seeing what we can do afterwards. And like the biggest thing for me that I took away from that was like, we come here, we help out, we can do as much as we want, but what happens at the end, we can serve food and we're physically giving labor and providing, but at the end of the day, what we have to do is go back home and make sure we're politically involved and we're voting and making sure our voices are heard for the changes we want. Doing what we did can only do so much. It will help those people with that immediate relief, but that long-term relief won't come until we do something about it, until we go to our representatives and we start voting in people that will listen to us.
That's right.
A lot of us from Illinois, we're a blue state. It's easy, but we need to reach out to those people that are in other states, our friends and family that have representatives that might not agree with what we agree with, and make sure that they're aware of what they can do. So that kind of like throughout the trip, like, what do we do? And I'm like, that's the only thing we can do is just make sure we have representatives that agree with what we want and make sure we elevate them and make sure that that's happening throughout. So that's kind of like what I got out of the whole food service piece.
Thank you. Thank you, Zayshan. I want to also help folks get a sense of, you've heard us refer to what we're calling kind of camps, and I say the word sort of lightly, but I'd like to ask some folks to talk about in Matamoros, which is in Mexico on the Mexican side. I'd like to have a few folks who can share a little bit about what it was like when you first visited. Some of us were able to get information from folks who've been supporting individuals who are living in those camps while they await. You heard from a couple of our colleagues here about while they're waiting for their court date or while they're waiting for next steps. So maybe Peggy or Mike, maybe even Hiba, if you want to talk a little bit about what the experience was like when you first stepped foot on the Mexican side in the camps in Matamoros, that would just be helpful for our guests tonight to have a sense of what you saw and what you experienced there and what you learned maybe.
I can jump in.
That'd be great. Thanks, Peggy.
So the camp is on the Rio Grande River, and it's up against the river on one side and pretty much the bridge from Texas into Mexico, great picture. Yeah, you can see that. So it's kind of crammed into this corner of a park. I'm not sure it's still exactly there, but when we were there, it had recently been located in that corner. So you see people bathing in the river, washing clothes in the river. The river's not particularly clean or healthy. You also see hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000, I don't know how many, tents, small tents. They're not like LL Bean tents. They're like makeshift tents. Some of them probably are tents. A lot of them are pieces of plastic or nylon or something like that. Because the area floods, some of the tents have wooden pallets on the inside that people have brought in, and they sleep on top of the pallets. People have built small ovens where they're cooking either outside of their tent or maybe even in the tent. The ones I saw were mostly outside. There are porta potties. There are large tents set up by some volunteer groups that were handing out food, like bags of flour and onions and things like that. There were a couple of communal showers. I believe they had big water containers turned upside down. There was something that someone had built to charge cell phones. So it was very makeshift, very creative use of the space. Apparently there are neighborhoods that people have gravitated to with people from the same countries that they came from. in Central America. The kids were absolutely amazing. The children were playing. There was a child rolling a ball, kicking a ball. There were kids running around. It was just astounding to me that in the midst of this, they were able to find a way to be playful and to have fun. And they just had this invincible sense of happiness, even in the worst possible situation. And I thought the parents seemed very protective of their children. Mm-hmm. So you don't immediately feel hopeless, but the more time we spent there, the sense of hopelessness really grew. I mean, we all had smiles on our faces and we're chatting with the people we met, but the statistics are just so horrible. Of the, I don't know how many, 95,000, 100,000 people who are trying to come into the country, something like 11 or 12 were granted asylum. And the country and our government contested every one of them. So here they are, they're like at a dead end, nowhere to go. They can see over the river into Texas, which is where they'd like to go, but their chance of getting there is pretty much zero.
Right. Thanks, Peggy. Anybody else want to join and sort of share a little bit about what you learned or some of what you saw, again, trying to sort of set the stage? I've got a couple photos, but certainly I don't think they do justice to what we often saw. So Hiba or Mike, anybody want to add a little bit more in terms of what the experience was like learning about folks who were living in the camps?
I could add a little bit.
Thank you, Mike.
Peggy's description was tremendously thorough, so it's really now, I think, not much more to add in terms of information about it, but I can just give you my reflection on what I saw there. I mean, it was an unexpected thing for me. When I had returned home from the experience and was able to reflect on it for a little while, I noticed that my visit to the camps actually did a lot to restore my faith in humanity. I thought the result was going to be the opposite, but it really did. What I noticed there was that this was a dire and, for me, unacceptable circumstance, and it such a heavy weight is placed on these asylum seekers. The conditions, when you look at them, when you first see them, are shockingly hard scrabble and hard to fathom. But as Peggy described, the smiles on people's faces, the banding together, the kindness with which people were greeting each other and us, the openness that everyone had toward each other everywhere you looked was amazing. And it was palpable everywhere. From the things that people had there, the shelters they had there, we're looking at a picture right now of the porta potties brought in, that there was the response from people, from humanity to the situation that existed there. People showing up like we were, but so many more besides us, showing up for strangers to help out in what everyone acknowledges is a terrible situation. As terrible as things are there, and they are, not to wash over any of that, humanity asserted itself, and it was palpable. You could see it everywhere. And so I was really heartened by that. Yeah. That there will be unfair policies. There will be people who, or there will be situations that weigh on us. That there will be things that just seem terribly unacceptable, that we can't survive, that others can't survive, and in those moments, humanity blossoms, comes out, and expresses itself all the more deeply to match the challenge. It's humanity stands up to that challenge,
Right.
and that was an incredible thing to reflect on.
Yeah, I think you are identifying the resiliency that is so sometimes baked in, and it's hard to often even expect it. And I think we probably, most of us didn't think that we would see that kind of hopefulness and resiliency happening. And I think that's a profound way of sort of thinking about the time that we were there. Any other final comments about the camp before we talk about some of the experiences getting to the camps? I don't know, Hib, if you want to jump in and share sort of like what it was like.
Yeah, there's just like a few things that stood out to me. Kind of this dichotomy of really complete vulnerability, and then just like all of these people kind of simultaneously working and living together. So you have, I think while we were there, almost 2,000 people in the camp, ranging from people that were new arrivals to there for 6 months or even longer. And the camp is located in what used to be like a neighborhood park, but it's a source of tension for the municipality, right? People don't necessarily, people that live in Matamoros don't necessarily want them there. They were already forced to leave from another location, some of the people living there. So it's just an unstable situation. Weather conditions could damage the camp, and now with Corona, everyone's health is at risk. There's like a lack of safety in the camp. People talk to us about the possibility of stealing. Some of the women in the camp had been raped, so everyone's kind of just vulnerable, as I said, and are easily victimizable to others living in the camp or others living in the surrounding area. But the things that kind of also gave me hope and were that kind of that other side, where some of the people in the camp had started businesses selling food or other supplies, and everyone was so sweet and welcoming. I talked about the kids earlier, and then while we were there was also some freelance reporters, I think or maybe reporters from BuzzFeed, that were going to be doing a Valentine's Day article on people that had found love in the camp, and I thought that was also really beautiful. So yes, kind of those two sides of things.
So important to see kind of the the challenge, but also the creativity, the ingenuity. I think that kind of coming even back to that ability to sort of look for something else. I think in moments I heard that from lots of people, right? Like, oh, that's amazing, and I wouldn't have thought that somebody would have thought to do that here. So yeah, I think that's great. Thank you. Any final thoughts before we talk a little bit about you heard? So just to give some context here. Essentially, the food prep takes place on the U.S. side in what's a church. Recently, World Central Kitchen had taken it over to help, and so they're coordinating volunteers. So they've got a nice system. The food has to come across the border, and I think in one of the photos here we saw a bridge. That's the bridge that folks are walking. But I'd love to hear from some folks who talk about, and you heard a little bit of this in terms of when each night, it requires a pretty healthy team of folks to get the food over, and then to also set up tables to be able to distribute the food. Essentially, World Central Kitchen, at least at the time that we were there, was providing dinners. And so the idea was to provide, you want to make sure that you have a full meal for folks. So I'll let some of our colleagues here share a little bit about, what the meals were like and what it was like to kind of be in the service line and carrying the food over. So Howard or Saif or Peggy, if anybody wants to kind of talk a little bit more about what that experience was like, getting the food over. And then really from there, I also want to talk about another side of things. And so we can even blend a little bit of this together. You heard about the courts, and you heard that most folks are not getting accepted, right? They're getting denied. And then those individuals are being sent back either to the nations that they were already distressed in, and obviously we're trying to leave from. So many of our team also observed the flights that were deporting people back to countries, and a lot of it was done sort of in the dark hours of either early morning or late night. So I'll start with a little bit about the food, and then we'll close with a little bit about the airports before we kind of turn it over to some final thoughts and questions and answers. So any thoughts about the transition, getting the food across that hasn't already been shared? I'll give folks a couple moments. And then we will, so these were sort of the carts. Anybody want to talk a little bit about what that experience was like? This is the actual service place. So you'll see this is where folks were lined up to serve. Howard, or?
Sure, a few comments about that.
Yeah.
The rabbi of our congregation, Bruce Elder, made a comment that he'll never look at one of these wagons and think of it again, as the same again. We used to think of it as a Ravinia Park wagon,
Right.
because so many people have them to load in everything to haul into Ravinia to sit on the grass. Well, World Central Kitchen has repurposed those wagons, and the wagons are almost the exact right size to carry the containers that keep food hot or cold into the park. We were moving enough food to serve 1,000 people into the park, which is an incredible undertaking by World Central Kitchen and the organization. So, kudos to them, because the organization was phenomenal. One of the first things that really struck me as we were hauling these wagons up the bridge, the incline of the bridge, and then hit the Mexican border was the number of Mexican Border Patrol people that said thanks to us, that thanked us for bringing the food across to these people. So that was definitely a sign of humanity. There's definite rules on what can and can't be brought across the border. It really seemed to me that the Mexican border guards, they were more than happy to close their eyes to the fact that the second day that we were bringing food, we brought sandwiches, which are not allowed. I think there were 1,000 sandwiches that were brought across so that there could be lunch the next day. The Team Brownsville, that is one of the organizers of all of this, has helped bring countless tents and blankets across the border, and they're put underneath these containers. And the Mexican Border Patrol, I don't think they care. In fact, I think they support it being done. Getting across the border, I probably should let Penny talk about the fact that when we were serving the food, and not meant to be disparaging at all, but when you see these tents and the facilities that they have, everybody that was lined up to get food, and some people were in line for hours to get food. It could be 2 hours in line, or I shouldn't say that, 2 hours before we started serving food, and then it took 2 hours to serve the food. So, people could be in line easily for 2 to 4 hours. They were clean, they were friendly, they were smiling, they were laughing, they were trying to converse with us. I found that when a mother or a father came through carrying a young child, I always, called out that, they got two servings, which I think was surprising to many of them. One of the things that World Central Kitchen made very clear is there was more than enough food. So anybody who wanted seconds got seconds. I was serving one gentleman, and all of a sudden I looked up and I realized he was probably 6'6" and 300 pounds. And I said, give that back to me. And I put in a second helping of food. And the number of times he said, gracias, 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 gracias. It was, just, being treated humanely was, part of the joy of being there, but also part of the wonder of the organization. I think with that, I will stop and, not hog the conversation and let Saif or Peggy or anyone else chime in.
Thanks, Howard. Saif or Peggy, anything you'd like to add about the serving of the food and kind of the time you spent there? I know, Saif, you touched a little bit on this.
Well, I don't know how to say this, except it felt like serving the food put us into a state of grace.
Mm.
It was a very spiritual experience, and I'm not a particularly spiritual person. So for me, it was very emotional, and having them thank us, and everybody thanked us. I felt like we should be thanking them for the opportunity to help.
Right. Yep. Thank you. I think a couple folks have shared this, even just the level of devotion with which World Central Kitchen encouraged us, give people what they want, right? So if they don't want the salad, or they only want the, make them feel as if this is an experience, and to really, again, connect with people in the most human level. If they say they need 2 plates, it's great, no problem, without any hesitation, and making anybody feel, worrisome about making the request. So thank you.
One more thing.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Josh Rubin, who is the activist who we all spent some time with, when he first took us into the camp, he said, remember, you are walking into these people's homes.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me, and particularly during the food serving part of it, because mealtime is a really special time, and for families in a position of not knowing where the next meal is coming from or what the next day will bring. It was really almost a sacred time for them. And I felt very honored to be able to be allowed to do that.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. We're gonna move to one more topic, and then we'll ask people to kind of give us some final thoughts. So if a couple of you were able to visit the airports, so Penny, Howard, I believe Hiba, share what it was like to be in the airports when you saw folks getting hurriedly sort of sent away. Can you just give a little bit about what that experience was like, what that left you with, or what you observed, just so folks have a sense of what that experience was like?
I'll go first, but I sort of feel like I should go last, because Howard and I went on the last day. We hadn't gone the first 2 days, and we went on the last day, and everyone had told us where to go and what we would see. And we got there, and we knew we were in the right place because there were actually 2 other people there that had been there on the other days, and there was nothing, even though we had been told a flight was going out. And it was 5 o'clock in the morning, like you had said, Aisha, under cover of dark. And we kept looking and looking and looking. And finally, at the appointed time the flight was supposed to take off, a parade of buses and police cars came out of the airport, and from behind the building was the airplane that took off. And on prior days, there had been a bigger crowd there, and also some young people making a documentary and other people asking questions. And it really said to me when we were there that, and people had reported to us about men being in shackles and all kinds of things that other people will speak to. But this gave me a really loud and clear message that our country knows this is not okay, and that people don't want this to happen. And when you have to hide something in the dark of night, it was horrifying to me. I don't know what was more horrifying, the thought of seeing this happen, which is why we didn't go the first couple of days. I just didn't think I wanted to see it, or the thought of hiding it and how shameful it is. And that's what struck me there. And I think the contrast, and as Peggy and everybody so eloquently talked about in the camp, of seeing these people's resilience. And one of the things that struck me is I thought, oh my gosh, these people will be living in filth. And it was immaculate. People were sweeping. It was like Peggy said, the pride of their home, and couples together and kids laughing and playing. And to see in the end, under dark of night, what we were doing to these families it was horrifying to me. And we know it's wrong, and this country knows it's wrong, and we continue to do it.
I just want to add one thing to what Penny just said. Just think about what the U.S. government was hiding. There were 3 school buses that presumably had been full of detainees that were dropped off. They were hidden behind one of the hangars. There was a 737 hidden behind another hangar. They were intentionally hiding. Think about what it takes to hide an airplane and 3 school buses. It's not easy. It was well planned to make sure that the witnesses that were there watching did not have a view of what was going on.
Thank you. Hiba, anything as I'm gonna let you all finish up a little bit about the airport, and then I'm gonna give Ryan a chance to talk about some ways to connect locally before we get some feedback from our audience around questions. Anything you'd like to add based on what you've heard from Howard and Penny right now?
No, I was only there for a little bit, so I don't
Okay.
think I saw much more than was already mentioned.
Okay, great. All right, so here's what we'd like to do. I do want to give all of our guests a chance to maybe leave us with a parting word, but I first want to have a chance we have a guest with us today. We're very fortunate to have Ryan Smith with us. He's the Release Hotline Coordinator and Case Manager for the Interfaith Community for Detained Immigrants. And what he's going to do, spend just a couple minutes telling us a little bit about the work that he's involved in and how maybe those of us, we know we're in the middle of a pandemic and travel is complex, but also thinking about ways that we can do things locally. So Ryan, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and I'll ask all of our panelists to think about a last minute thought. And to our guests, please start putting your questions into the question box so that we can get those answered. I see a few are coming in, so we'll make sure to pass those along as well.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Aisha. Appreciate the invite and being asked to speak. And I'd also like to thank the panelists for your amazing work that you've done down at the border as witnesses and caretakers and accompaniers. That is vitally, vitally important, not only down there, but to what we do here in Chicago. So very quickly, I'm the case manager and detention release coordinator for the Interfaith Community for Detained Immigrants. We're a Chicago-based organization, 501c, very interfaith, and we focus on not only those in detention, but those post-detention. Real quickly, I'd like to hit on a couple points. Everything that you heard that happens at the border goes on for much longer. So everything that we handle is essentially post-border. It's a 2 to 5 year ordeal. And I'll walk you through that very quickly because we're limited on time. When you seek asylum, for example, at the border or any protected status, you are imprisoned. You're jailed and sent to a prison. So the average stay and I don't call them detention centers for a very specific reason because I've worked in them and I do pastoral care in them, and they very much are prisons, usually adjacent to a federal facility. So one thing that I'd like to mention there is that they are not afforded due process. So the average stay in a detention center is 2 to 3 years to wait for your final hearing. Now, what most people don't know is that a vast majority of those people from the border who are detained are sent to live in Chicago prisons here. We currently serve 4 within the Chicagoland area, broader, but we also include Wisconsin in that. We visit Dodge Detention Center, Kankakee, Kenosha, McHenry, and Pulaski. That's a lot of people detained here in the broader area. In Chicago alone, we have 3 children's centers. So we have to understand that everything that happened on the border continues up here. So the fight goes on. What we do here in Chicago, and I just want to really quickly give everyone a brief scenario of what happens when you are detained here. You're detained here for 2 to 3 years. You are not afforded an attorney. You do not have civil rights. It's very important to remember you do not have access to a due process, attorney, any of those things that you would normally receive as a citizen in a prison here in the United States. So what does that mean for us? That means that we're in the detention centers offering interfaith pastoral care. I'm Muslim, so I tend to focus on those Muslim individuals detained, but we have people of all faiths and all backgrounds, very, very important in those detention centers. After you're released from detention, I want to give a scenario of what it looks like when you are released. If anyone in the Chicago area, at 101 Ida B. Wells, which is the Chicago Immigration Field Office, on your day of release, you are, they open the doors on Clark, and that's it, and you walk out. No resources. Maybe you didn't. So you might have intended to go to Texas, and you're now in Chicago. You might not even know where Chicago is in the United States. You don't speak the language. You don't have money. You don't have appropriate clothes. I picked people up in February with flip-flops and shorts in the Chicago area. So what we do is we operate a hotline. That hotline can be called, and they can request transportation, money assistance, transportation assistance, anything they could possibly need, medical needs, housing. We have housing units here in the Chicago area. The stay here with us, we usually like to remain in assistance with somebody until they are fully independent, and even beyond that. That process usually takes a couple years. So a lot of my cases I'm working with for years at a time as they regularize their status, fight their case, oftentimes without an attorney, which means they have to learn the law in a country they don't know, and they don't often speak the language. They come from all over the world. They're all faith backgrounds. We have thousands living here in the Chicago area, many detained, and many are detained in detention centers here in Chicago with massive COVID outbreaks. So it's not only, I've been in there for years now, and I can tell you that the health risks are already incredibly high in detention centers. So what we're looking at is we have many volunteer opportunities in 6 programs here in the Chicago area. I'm going to talk about 2 opportunities for you today, but anyone who would like to know more about volunteer opportunities or ways to contribute, please reach out, and you can we can put you in contact with our volunteer coordinator. 2 opportunities we have here right now. A number of the individuals who we have rehomed here in the Chicago area, which means they've moved into apartments or some level of independent living, or they live in our intentional living community, which is in Hyde Park and houses 20 people there. Those individuals are suffering because they're not able to work anymore. So as many people in the United States are suffering now, the only problem is a lot of them don't have access to public benefits. A lot of them do not get a stimulus check. A lot of them don't have the safety nets that we have in place. And while, as we heard from many of our panelists, they are incredibly resilient and incredibly resourceful and powerful and have agency, there's just some things you can't win against. So the mutual aid fund we started, and Asif, if you could share that link in the comments, please. This is a fund that we have given you an opportunity. I'll steal Peggy's word there because that was a great way to phrase that. All of these are opportunities to contribute something to an individual. We have names, we have needs, individual needs, so you can see exactly what your money is going to. It is always accountable. I should also mention that all of our funds are Zakat eligible. So you can indicate in your donation that you prefer it to be Zakat eligible or Sadaqah or whatever you want it to be. We also have an opportunity for those of you who are looking to be directly involved. Now, normally throughout the year, outside of pandemic, I could use you in a million different places, either in the detention centers, the children's centers, the houses of hospitality, the hotline. Many of the panelists here actually volunteer in those in that capacity and could also tell you more about their experience with it. But for those that would like to get involved a little more now, we have a letter writing program for those in detention. We are not allowed to visit at the moment, because of the COVID-19 outbreak. And we have a letter writing campaign going on, and we're setting up a video conference campaign so that we can video conference with those in the detention center as we have formerly offered pastoral care. So those are some quick opportunities. I could talk for hours about this, but I won't because I know that we have a limited time. But please reach out. We are always in need of assistance. And thank you so much, Aisha and panelists, for inviting me. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Ryan. Walaikum salam. Thank you very much, Ryan. We're going to go ahead and start with a couple questions here, and then, that I think that'll give our panelists a chance to also share some additional. One question we have from Allison Davis here and I think I'll direct this towards you, Howard, to start, but if anybody else would like to chime in, please let me know. With respect to the court observation that you mentioned Spanish translation. Was it evident to you whether there were asylum seekers in court who were not fully fluent in either Spanish or English? So, for example, speakers of indigenous or other local languages. Like, could you tell if people had other needs? So even though there were Spanish translators, were there other needs that could have been addressed if folks did not happen to speak Spanish, the translators?
I didn't notice any people that weren't native Spanish speakers,
Okay.
But there was no way to know that for sure. What I will say, I made the comment before that I am a non-practicing attorney. I had a very hard time following the legalities, the legalese that the judge was speaking. So I cannot imagine that a translator got all of it correct, and that someone who's not trained would understand exactly what it was that the judge was explaining to them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. We have another question about sort of how many folks are in the camp and how long approximately are people waiting from the time that they're arriving at the border till their final case is sort of being heard. And since most people are being denied asylum, maybe we can help sort of crystallize that path for folks in terms of where they'll go. So not sure if anybody wants to jump in around kind of how many folks we were told were in the camp, and then how long people are waiting from the time that they're checking in at the camp through potentially being returned. Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I will. As I said, I was shocked. We were there in February, and then in our courtroom, they were explaining that there's the second step, and that's where you come with paperwork and you present your case. They even mentioned witnesses, how that was a possibility. I had no idea, but and paperwork you needed to fill out, which was a pretty thick packet. There were a couple people in the camp that could help you do that, and then we were also told by the bailiff there was a list of attorneys that they could contact. I also don't know how that was going to be a possibility, but that was just the second hearing. And then if you got past that, you got a third hearing, which I'm assuming was, again, another 3 or 4 months. And to me, it was all to be put on a plane with the man, if you were with men in your family in shackles, and sent right back, which is what Josh Rubin, as was mentioned, was saying, is that it's a sham. And to make these people live in these conditions that they made the absolute best of, and somehow maintained their humanity, seems so unjust and unfair, because it seemed to me it was at least 6 months that you were just sitting there with nothing. And you know what, I think he quoted that, like you said, 12 people, 0.4% were getting through. So it made me feel sad for them. If you're going to not let them in, then, I mean, cut it quick.
Oh, yeah.
Well, something that the current administration did, effective, I believe it was December 16th of 2019, you were not eligible for asylum in the United States if you hadn't applied and been denied asylum in a country that you passed through on your way to the United States. That means, unless you happen to be a Mexican citizen, you had to have passed through at least one other country and applied for asylum. So perhaps, the few people that might have gotten asylum may have done this process for months in a country that they passed through. The Mexican residents that were seeking asylum, and there were some of them in this camp as well. Just in reading the Facebook posting, they've all been moved to Mexico City now because of the fear of COVID, leaving the non-Mexican citizens in the encampment.
Right. Thank you. We heard also from folks that very few of the asylum seekers are even eligible, even have access to an attorney. You certainly heard from Ryan that a lot of these features are not even available. We have one more question, what we want to sort of get carried to folks here. So I'll see if a couple of you would like to answer this. Thinking about kind of the aspects, all aspects of the trip. Now we've been back for a period of time. We've had some time to reflect. We're sharing again today. What was the most surprising moment, or what surprised you the most thinking back about the trip? So if anybody wants to jump in, Mike, I saw you.
Yeah.
There you go. Go ahead.
I'd just like to share a little story from serving food. I on both of the nights that I served, did kind of back of the house organization. People were out serving meals directly to asylum seekers. I played the role of bringing food out and bringing it to the table where people were serving. And there was a staff of World Central Kitchen people wearing T-shirts. And I had met some of them preparing food during one of the days. And then there were other staff that I didn't know. And so there were these three men that I was coordinating with. And their English was not very good. I think one of them didn't really speak any English. And they were all wearing the shirts. And we were working together and kind of getting to know each other and getting the system down and, doing little jokes here and there. And while the kids kind of came around and were kind of wanted to be involved in what we were doing, there was music playing and the kids would dance. And then I'd get caught up in the music and I'd dance, and they thought my dancing was hilarious. And so they got a huge kick out of that because look at this guy trying to do the dance and he's no good. And we had a great time. And so these other guys that I'm working in the back with, we're all having a chuckle about that. And then we get called to work a little more. And by the end of the night, there was kind of a camaraderie there of like all doing this work together. And as the people trickled away, having gotten their meals, these three stepped around and started taking meals. And it was at that moment I went, wait a minute, these guys aren't staff. These guys live here. Yeah. And they came to work the line. It blew me away.
Yeah.
They needed food just as much as everybody else.
Yeah.
And they came to serve. It touched my heart like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah. That is powerful. And I have to say, I think as we think about, I think all of us could probably share, all kinds of moments, and certainly even in just reflection and the ability to reflect in our own comfort from home and whatnot. I really want to say thank you all for reconnecting and bringing us all back together. I know this was delayed given all the things that are happening, and your flexibility to go and talk with us virtually. I know certainly we hoped to be able to do this in person. I do want to just throw out, I know you've been seeing some things come through the chat about ways to connect some of the organizations that really were powerful, Team Brownsville, World Central Kitchen. I've added another organization, Sudo for Solidarity, which is really trying to end camps around and so much of the challenges that many of us are facing. But a couple just reminders, the more we talk about it, share these conversations, whether you heard something today. Also, if there's opportunities, I know some people are asking, are there opportunities for people to get involved again, whether or not we want to be able to have trips. I know when we initially went, we thought we would be able to get groups going from time to time to be able to, again, share. So we hope to be able to share that in the future as well as things kind of come out of what we're dealing with in terms of the pandemic. We want you to vote. We really want you to complete your census. These things matter and they help us with sometimes resources. If there's any way that any of us can be of any support to any of you, or if you have questions, do let us know. We do want to mention Witness at the Border, which is a phenomenal, if you're not following them on Facebook, please do. We do want to make sure that if there's a way for you to connect with resources online, certainly donations, please feel free to do that through MCC and other organizations. We appreciate all of your time and you're thoughtful. We saw lots of great comments and questions. And I just want to say a great thanks to all of our friends who we developed friendships and kind of connections. Thank you for taking some time out of your evening to share these stories, and I look forward to seeing you at some point again. So thank you all. This was a great evening and a wonderful opportunity to connect with all of you. So with that, we will say good evening, salam to all of you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you.